introduce Annabel Merrett, who is the artist who has put together this exhibition, which is called Mood States. And she's going to be telling us a bit more about the artworks and about her process and what it means to her. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Annabel. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for those kind words. And thank all of you for coming. I can see some friendly faces, and I'm really grateful for everyone's support. Please bear with me. I haven't done much public speaking, but I've got lots to say. And I'm happy to answer questions at the end. It's been great exhibiting my work here. There's been a good synergy between my art and the museum's ethos, which is a positive and progressive attitude to mental health. Alleluia. And for a small museum, it really packs a punch. I don't know how many of you are aware, but this hospital is the original historic Bethlem. Bethlem was a nickname for this hospital when it was a version of hell, with extreme cruelty and chaos and truly terrifying incarceration of the sane as well as the mentally ill. So to find a positive and progressive view on this site, right here, right now, is heartening. We've come a long way. I'm going to talk you through how these sculptures arrived here, from conception to delivery, and zone in on the 5 that are raised up on these boxes. After learning how to make clay portraits, usually called busts, I knew that I wanted to make something that reflected what goes on in my mind. And this easily grew into thinking about what goes on in all of our minds and how we all have common thoughts and common fears. I really warmed to the idea that a piece of art might make someone feel less alone and they might feel safer around their own minds. This hope became my motivation, and I aimed for each head to signal we are not alone with our mad and horrible and very often intolerable thoughts. For me, lots of themes and concepts continually rattle around inside my head. Ideas arrive randomly, whenever they feel like it, and hopefully while I'm swimming, so I have a chance to hardwire the idea into my memory. They arrive almost fully formed, so vaguely doable, and I've imagined maybe 2 key elements, including a material. The idea will very often be based on an observation or experience of the human condition. For me, this potentially pretentious phrase is about human nature and how we're so often drawn towards protecting ourselves and then consequently doing the wrong thing. Injustice is another strong source of ideas. For example, I can channel vitriol in a heartbeat towards the post office cruelty to their sub-masters and the dubious relationship our last 5 Prime Minister have had with the truth. The list grows. On the subject of injustice, do look in the objects gallery to our right. There are lots of things there that were used daily in the hospital, past and present. The straitjackets particularly gave me the chills. The fabric looked strong and thick and somehow decisive. I could imagine a fragile and angry body being held still while they were forced into it, and it was a horrible image. Whereas in the opposite room, where all the paintings are made by artists who've spent time in the hospital, there's a piece by Tracy Hodge that worked on me. It's called Don't Just Medicate Me. Using the words worked on me might sound odd, but that is what good art does. It makes the viewer think differently. it gives out penny-dropping moments, and at best, it changes attitudes. I like the idea that an artwork has a job to do. So for me, having winced at the straitjackets next door, here, Tracy's work confronted me with the modern replacement, which clearly is tranquilizing drugs. Who knew? I hadn't thought through this potential abuse. Art can be powerful stuff. Do go and see it. Then, once I have an idea, developing it is an unknown process. I've realised that if I know how I'm going to make something, I'm not truly creating anything. I'm just a rather inefficient factory line worker. I find not knowing fun and freeing and full of potential. I feel excited. A few ideas don't work out, but I'm pretty tenacious and most will result in a sculpture of some sort. I've bought some tools and bits and pieces. It looks, from my studio, it looks a bit DIY because it is. Really, DIY is an incredibly useful skill for me. All of these tools have been used to make these heads. And I get more kit from the builders merchants Leyland than I do from any art supply shop. So the process for making these heads started with me making a clay model of my head. And I did it in front of the mirror, and I took a few side profile selfies. And I used these calipers. I repeatedly measured my head and then the clay model. And then a different angle of my head and then the clay model. I wanted a 3D shape that at the very least had the proportion of my head. The clay head itself was destroyed in the mould making process, which I found a little harsh. Having spent so long crafting it, I had to reduce it to gouged out fistfuls of damp clay. But I've got over it. This is a rough idea of what it looked like before the micro trauma of reducing it. From here, I made a silicone mould. This is just one side of a two-part mould. And working with silicone is fun, and it suits my way of working. You don't need to measure anything, so you don't need to remember any numbers, and this suits me. You get the correct amount of catalyst, this stuff, and you can see how it's very deep pink. And the correct amount is judged by the shade of pink that this white silicone turns. So you keep stirring away until you get the right pink, and then you know it will set soon and you'll get the texture you want. It's fun. I was lucky enough to commission a professional to make the second identical mould, note identical, and the difference really does make me smile. Here we have the mother mould, which is rigid and strong. It's the hard outer shell that holds the softer, floppier mould in place, rather like a mother would hold a baby's head up to stop it flopping. Mine broke, whereas this one will never break, even if I stamped on it. Inside is this lovely smooth consistency and texture. And there are tidy keys all the way around. The keys are a series of dents, and on the other side, little studs. Beautifully put together. What happens then, when you put them together like that, they marry up beautifully. Otherwise, you end up with a sort of squished mess looking like a broken nose at the front, or a cubist drawing. So this two-part mould is then filled with good old-fashioned plaster of Paris. And I recently came across a good bit of trivia about plaster of Paris. It's a naturally occurring substance in the ground, and the best source is the hill of Montmartre in Paris, hence the name, plaster of Paris. Many of us might have childhood memories of plaster. I remember making a Winnie the Pooh at my friend's Kate's house. We filled the mould up and put it in the airing cupboard. And when I took it out, he had a big dent across his tummy from one of the airing cupboard slats. And I was cross. It's funny what sticks in our memories. Maybe that unaddressed irritation sparked my career. Who knows? So, lots of mixing and waiting for setting. I've had to learn to stop fiddling with things when they're about to set and to give the material time. This project has been great because I've had lots of heads to work on simultaneously, so I was kept distracted. The earliest heads are all solid plaster and are pretty heavy. They required a lot of sanding, which I did by hand, and it was lengthy and tiring, and it made my arms ache. I've now bought myself a little mini electric sander called a mouse. But pre-mouse, when I got to the last head, I was bored of sanding, and the tedium of sanding had given me time to think. And I wondered if my ideas were becoming over-earnest. The solution was joy above, this one here. It didn't need any more sanding, and it was already a beautiful, white, snowy wedding cake of a mountain. And it was a lighter and less earnest idea. As soon as I worked this out, I loved it, almost as much as I love being in real mountains. And instantly, I was moving on, imagining and mixing the right blue for the mountain sky. The reason I'm telling you this is it's a good example of how creativity happens for me. Even with a reasonably formed idea, there is no plan at all. It can happen instantly, and importantly, materials can very often show the way forward. The next group of heads that I created were made of fiberglass. Here's one I made earlier. Oh, this is the fiberglass. It is nasty stuff, but it suited the new smoother mould. And Power here was the first sculpture that came out of that mould. It's incredibly light, and picking them up is like picking up a little newborn baby, and too high, and it surprises me every time. I wanted the surface of each head to be different, and to make sure one of them was smooth simplicity. So I could paint it in just one colour, with no dents or shadows. A single colour can avoid complications and diversions and bring a single element into focus. In this case, this little chap. I chose black because of the obvious dark cloud that arrives when someone's frightened. And I chose gloss because originally it was matte and it didn't feel proud enough. And I think people in power often feel rather proud of themselves. And I do think we have all felt like this little chap, powerless and frightened. Talking about the powerless, people inside this hospital will have all had their helplessness rammed home to them by the terrible way we've labelled mentally ill people in the past. I've compiled a list. Poor sots have been called prisoners, lunatics, bedlams, madmen, maniacs, exhibits, inmates, patients, guests, clients, and now service users. I love this progression. I understand that the older generation may feel bemused by the newest label, but words do matter, and old-fashioned connotations are a dangerous thing. They stifle process and harbour negativity. So, on to decision, this one in the middle here. The number of suicides right on our doorsteps is horrifying and deeply shameful. It must be the ultimate state of loneliness. And it's odd to call this one popular, but it is, sadly. Which speaks volumes in itself. This is a piece of chalk from the Thames that a mudlarking friend gave to me. I used it to draw road lines here on decision. The chalk was better than any paint that I knew because of its translucent quality. And I wanted the road to be quiet and not the point. Mainly, I feel sad about this piece. It is thoroughly depressing that it's so popular and resonant. But I am pleased that the art is airing the subject, which has got to be a good thing. And I'm pleased now to take you on to something lighter. Green Monster. This one on the end. This silicone pump from Leyland's produced perfect black globules. When I look back on my sketchbook, I found these random words that I wanted to play with and to try and manifest. Are you ready? Shiny, glistening, classy, snobby, haughty, green envy, black dress, green drips, black tears, rotten, filthy, ruining, stupid. I must have been having an interesting day. Curiously, all the feedback on Green Monster is about assuming it's a woman, something that I'm keen to explore the more people look at it. And according to Age, the feedback has been fascinating. The clue is this fine emerald ring here, £1 from Argos. Depending on your age, the piece is about the car crash of getting divorced or the stress of wanting to get married. I was thinking about periods of a woman's life when there's change afoot and insecurity is baked in. For example, when she's either engaged or moving house or grieving or pregnant. However, how I interpret it really isn't the point. What's this one about? Is a question I'm most often asked, and I've gone some way to explain in the booklets that you all have. But really, listen up, it's not the point. The point is how you interpret it. How do you feel when you look at it? What feelings are provoked in you? All of this art is yours to digest. And finally, head noise, this little white one. I love this one, and it entertains me that I chopped its ears off. All the figures are opining about other people. In my sketchbook, I wrote in a repeating pattern, chat, 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 bitch, 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 chat, 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 casual, careless, gossip, 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 chat, chat, chat. And it went on and on in a rather beautiful arc. And I might well have been in a slightly tedious lecture. The absence of ears is an instruction. Stop listening, shut them out, banish them, ignore them. These opinions are not valid or nice or relevant. We all have a chiding voice in our head that comes from somebody else, and they're rarely helpful. Thinking about chiding voices, in the gallery to our left, please look at another very powerful piece of art by a service user, Elise Paquette. It's called The Fragile Board. It shouts about how a person suffering from anorexia nervosa may feel around the family dining table. And I'm told that when school children visit, this is the piece that they tend to gravitate towards. And I'm not surprised. It's arresting. Back to head noise. I used this radiator paint to create just the white sheen I was looking for. Not glossy, almost bland, as if in a dream. And I'm now on the hunt for a more sustainable solution. The railway model people, who are my new best friends, directed me to these little white figures. And here, I was thinking through the idea of would it work on this wax brain that I made. It was gratifying somehow to reduce these little figures and diminish them somehow. I remember thinking, I'm cutting you off at the knees because you can't shut up. And I might also be cutting the tip of my thumb off if I'm not careful. Again, it's funny which vignettes stick in our mind. They are small and hard to slice. And for my entertainment as much as yours, I've put their little amputated legs in a display case to show you. I've had personal experience of sitting in a psychiatrist's waiting room, in silence, with strangers, a mother and her teenage daughter, unable to speak to each other, let alone look at each other, and it's a painful watch. The disdain for each other was palatable. And I so wanted to help them talk. I felt so strongly that it does not need to be like this. And since that day, I've been commissioned to make another head noise for that same waiting room. And I will be delighted if it prompts a conversation or a connection. And I'd be absolutely thrilled if it helps anyone find their words, or maybe a mother find her ears. Even in silence, I hope this piece might make someone feel less afraid of their own madness, and to understand that they're not alone and others feel like this too. Onwards to the final stage of their journey. Once I'd made all 14 of them, 2 couldn't fit on the table, I was very quickly invited to show them in the atrium of the Institute of Psychiatry, King's College. Here they have a footfall of about 200 people daily, and almost all are medics of the mind. I was delighted with this demographic. They were just the people who I'd like to encourage to look beyond the textbooks, beyond the statistics, beyond the symptoms, and imagine just how alone and frightened some of their patients might be feeling. For this exhibition, my good friend and curator, Mark Golby, and I put together the booklet you now have in your hands, and it's been my calling card ever since. Another friend told me about the Museum of the Mind, and I posted the booklet here. Rachel Rayborn, the registrar, got in touch with me, and along with Colin Gale, the director, we met and talked about dates and details, and they welcomed me in. Ultimately, I wanted to make people think that mental health problems do not need to be scary, solitary experiences, and that others are in the same boat too. And I'm honoured that I was given that opportunity. And I feel honoured that you've listened to me today. Thank you.